All right. So this is Pueblo Art History 101. It's pass-fail. If you stick it out, you pass, or I pass. If you leave, then I failed. So anyway, I was compelled to do this because some of these artists that died before the internet are already forgotten. And I want to bring them back up. But anyway, there were artists here before the 50s, and Joseph Hitchens came to Pueblo in 1872. And this is a painting of Joseph Hitchens. And he dreamed of having an art center in 1872. And 100 years later, that did happen. But you do find some of his paintings around town here and there, so keep your eyes open for his work. But I'm going right to the 50s now. This is the complete art department at Pueblo Junior College, which was transitioning into Southern Colorado State College shortly thereafter. But this is Paul Eyrig was the chair of the department, and Ed Scheibel was the rest of the department. Anyway, about Ed, he came in the 50s teaching, and one thing he did, he started a children's art class in the 50s. And I went to that class, and I remember a drawing of a flying purple people eater on the board. So that would put that date at 1958. That's when that was a hit. And I did make a ceramic hippopotamus in that class. And I still have that. And it also puts me way ahead of Ken Williams and the Lapkas as far as ceramics. This is Ed today, and Ed is here. This is one of Ed's paintings. It's a cross series. It's not too recent, and that's Ed holding up one not too long ago. Then shortly thereafter, Sarah Uffelman came to town in the 50s. And she was born in Calcutta in 1920, but she studied at the Carnegie Institute, studied art. And then she enlisted in the Women's Army during World War II. And after that, she went to, with her husband, to CU Boulder, where she got her advanced art degree. And Ed says they would talk for hours about art back in those days. The intensity of the projector. Anyway, this is not Sarah Uffelman's work. This is Max Beckmann. He was a German expressionist, and she studied under him. And one of his things was a lot of black line. We'll get to that later. This is an early Sarah Uffelman from 1955. You can kind of see the similarities. Okay, then in 1962, Orlin Helgo came to teach at the college. Image on the left is him with a brochure for a show he did at Gallery A in Taos. And there is a big connection with Pueblo artists and Gallery A in Taos. But he was the leader in showing in that gallery. This is the earliest Helgo I've seen, which is dated 1964. It's a Zimmer drawing and print show. And in the circle are embossed silver dollars, which kind of reminds me of probably the beginning of his Prairie Alphabet series. Also in 1962, John Mendoza came to town to teach. And since Helgo and Mendoza both started teaching at the same time, they became good friends. This is a 1964 John Mendoza painting. Okay, a little later, Dorothy came along. This is a John Mendoza painting of Dorothy. And this is one of Dorothy's student works when she was a student of Helgo's from 1964. This is one that you're probably more familiar with. Then in the 60s, Judith Pierce came to town. She came from Indiana. And I'm talking, this is a core group. You're going to get a handout that has this core group of artists. And you're also going to get a list of artists that I remember from the 50s through the early 90s. And your assignment when you get these is to look at that list, and if you know of an artist that I don't remember and what they did, I want you to fill that out. So this is one of Judith Pierce's works from 1968, I believe that's dated. Okay, Robert Wands came in the 60s also to teach at the college. This is not a 1960 portrait of Robert, but there's a video that the Estes Park Museum did that's an hour-long video about Robert's career, and I really recommend watching that. But this is from that video. This is his more typical work. With nice large clouds and mountains. But one thing about Robert, his father was an artist, Alfred. And Alfred studied at the Cincinnati or the Cleveland Art Institute. And his classmate of his was Vance Kirkland. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Vance Kirkland Museum, but they were classmates there. And Alfred taught at the Colorado Women's College, and Vance Kirkland taught at DU. So Alfred was the biggest influence on Robert, but this is a Vance Kirkland modernist painting. So once in a while you'll see something like this from Robert Wands. It's very modernist. So it's got that Vance Kirkland look. Okay, now I'm going to go through just a series of slides of these artists and just to show you the similarities. This is actually an Ed Scheibel painting. This is an Ed Scheibel collage and painting. This is a John Mendoza. John was one of Ed's students. This is a Dorothy Mendoza, which has cross influence in it, and you can see some Helgo influence. You can see the colorists. These artists are all fantastic colorists. This is an Orland Helgo painting that has John Mendoza influence as far as I'm concerned. And this is an Ed Scheibel painting. This is a Dorothy Mendoza painting. You can see a lot of the similarities in their work. This is a Judith Pierce painting. Now this is a Helgo called Southwest Seance. And let's see. If you have one of these, you're welcome to use it too. But I do want to point out that the figure down here, it's a horned man, a man with antlers. And up here, the people with halos. All these artists seem to do a lot of that. And anyway, this is the cover of Southwest Art Magazine with that image from 1977. And the thing about Southwest art with these artists at the time, Georgia O'Keeffe kind of validated Southwest art as something really valid. I know I saw a major retrospective of hers in 1970 at the Chicago Art Institute, and that's when I realized the Southwest is really where I belong. And so anyway, some of these artists all explored Southwest imagery. John Johnson, who's recording this, if it's any good, is the photographer that took this picture for Southwest Art Magazine. Okay, this one is called this one's called Prairie Seance. And the prairie figured big in most of these artists, and I can't find any human imagery in this piece. This was owned by Hank and Erna Marie Williams. But there is I don't know if you can see that gravestone is the only human imagery with birds coming out, which had some spiritual meaning, I'm sure. But the prairie, like I say, figured in with this. And this is a Sarah Uffelman. And you can tell she wandered on the prairie. These are tadpole shrimp. And when you go on the prairie in the playas and pools that appear after rainstorms, these shrimp will hatch out. They're dormant in the soils. And you can only find them out, around the prairies here. But it's very interesting watercolor by Sarah Uffelman. This is also a Sarah Uffelman oil painting landscape that Ed and Bonnie Scheibel own. And this is also a Sarah Uffelman You see the use of black in this. But anyway, Ed said that she was very depressed when she painted this. And she did suffer from depression, and she also had massive head pain, which led to her suicide in 1968. So she was well known when she's here, before she even moved to Pueblo, so there is an internet presence about her art that you can find. So some of her work could get very dark. I've seen a few of these. This one, there's one called Mother that has they're all around the mother in the coffin. I'm not sure what this one's called. But yeah, her work could be very dark. And then this one, you know, the black, this is another Sarah Uffelman. This was bought in the early Own Your Own days. Now, one thing, Ed Scheibel, and he started the Own Your Own art show. There weren't that many venues for art. Started that in 1960-61, and it was a fundraiser for scholarships at the college. And the couple that bought this, they bought that probably in 1961 from the Own Your Own. Now, the Own Your Own turned into a pretty big deal back in the 70s and 80s, and it was in this whole, without the walls here, it was in this conference room. And it was really a big show. They got some prestigious jurors, and it was really quite the show to be in. I sold my first big bucks piece for $50 here at the Own Your Own. A few years later, I got 385, so I really was hitting big time. Now I'm going to move on to Judith Pierce. Now the thing about Max Beckmann and Sarah Uffelman is the use of black. And Sarah Uffelman encouraged Judith Pierce to start using black, and that's when she started this ink resist process, which I don't exactly know how you do it. You use a gouache and you pour ink over India ink and you wash it in the bathtub. But she was very much influenced by the Southwest. She did this canyon series. And she would wander the prairies too, and I wandered a few times with Judith. One thing Judith always told me, she said she wished people bought art like they did in the 60s. So I don't know how good that was, but I wish they did too. Now this one, ink resist, and you see the feathers. And one thing Judith did, she did these feather mandala pieces, and I can't find any of those, but she sold those. Carol Kronwiger has one, okay. But she also used, I warned her about this, she'd use feathers of wild birds that are protected. She kind of ignored me till they caught her in the Taos gallery and made her take those down. So then she started just painting all the feathers. This is another Judith Pierce. It's just straight gouache, no ink resist. This one of Judith's. Now, I told you, the man with the deer horns, you can see maybe Helgo influence in it, but the other thing is the snakes. And putting patterns in animals is a Native American tradition. And Helgo did that, and I don't know if the show they have here now has any snakes, but he did a lot of interesting snakes that also were horned serpents, kind of like the Avenue of the Pueblo traditions. Now this is a Sarah Uffelman. She would really do some really nice watercolors too. This was owned by the Mendozas.
Go lower on
waterfall.
the of the
That's a Dorothy Mendoza with a waterfall.
So it's darker.
This is a John Mendoza, fairly early watercolor. And this is an Ed Scheibel. This is an Ed Scheibel. This is a John Mendoza. This is a Robert Wands of the Spanish Peaks in Wapatoya. And this is an Orlin Helgo of the West Spanish Peak. And he used these slashy lines, and I haven't seen any other paintings he's done with that, but he would experiment with brushstrokes. Now the Art Center has the East Peak in their collection, because I've seen it here, and it's done in pointillism. So I don't know if they were meant to go together, but this was found in a secondhand store in Walsenburg. And it's sketched for La Vida. In 1977, he did a lot of Huerfano County paintings. I'll get a little bit back to that later. Oh, but I do want to point out the three clouds up there. That was a signature of one of his students, the three clouds. So they all influenced each other back in those days. Okay, speaking of students, we'll get to that. I hope you've seen the show at the Art Center here of David Caracatas, but he was a student at that college in the early 60s. And all those professors that were around. So, this is one that shows patterns in the animals. It could be Orland-Helgo influence, it could be Native American influence, but Caricato was very successful in the Southwest market, in the major art markets like Scottsdale and Santa Fe. And I urge you to go look at his show. But yeah, he did the college in the early 60s, and then he did his army. This is also, remember there was a draft going on. Now I'm getting to Ken Williams. So we're starting to transition into the 70s. And I'll talk about Ken Williams. He was a geology major, and his wife Judith was the art major. And this all goes back to Ed Scheibel. Judith was taking at a demonstration of ceramics or pottery that Ed Scheibel was getting, and Ken went to pick her up, and that's when, he discovered pottery. So, and Judith, what I know is Judith does the tiles, Ken does the brick, and I do find a lot of Helgo influence in their work, especially in the tiles that Judith does. Okay, now I'm going to get to the Latkas. They were starting in the early 70s. They were fixing up their house, their grounds on the house, and then it spread into the whole neighborhood. And, you can, if you look at what they've done, they've converted that whole block neighborhood that used to be a slum into a very nice art neighborhood. And I know early on, Jean's mother was visiting, and she pulled Jean aside and advised her, don't let Tom bring his stuff in the house. But anyway, they've got their stuff all over the neighborhood now, and we're much better for it. And I would be remiss if I don't discuss John Wilbar. He took some classes there in the early 60s before he went on to CSU. He flunked out of that, partied out of that, but he got his way into CU and became an architect. And he came back to Pueblo to work for Hertig and Gardner and was instrumental in the designing of this center here. This one's in front of the courthouse, or the police station. Okay, now we're in the 70s. I'm going to talk about, this is the faculty about 1970, 71. And you can see there's Orland-Helgo, there's Robert Wines, Lou Tilley. I'll talk a little bit about Lou Tilley. He lived in Colorado Springs, and he was part of the Broadmoor Academy, and he's really more well known up in Colorado Springs. But I'm including him because he was faculty here for a long time. This is 1948, probably his studio when he was at the Broadmoor Academy. And then Carl Jensen was in that. He was a ceramics instructor. And this is a 1970 Carl Jensen ceramic that I bought at the Channel 8 auction back then. Okay, now I'm going to get to the students in the early 70s. This was called the Prairie Art Group, and front and back. The guy sitting down there is John Johnson, who's recording this. And he had to run up and down the cactus to get that picture. But who we can identify in this, I'm going to start over here. That's Nathan Solano. This is an artist named Paul Gatos. This is an artist, Nick Latka. We don't know who all these are. This is John Johnson. This is Orland-Helgo. And this is John Pumphrey. Now, John Pumphrey was my childhood friend from kindergarten on, and we lived at the edge of the prairie, so we wandered the prairie as kids. And he's how I met Orland-Helgo. I'll get a little context here. I don't know what this project was, but it's something for the Prairie Arts Group, but that's me sitting on top of Baculite Mesa with a fistful of hot dogs and sauerkraut. And I haven't changed much. But anyway, this Prairie Art Group, the whole idea of the prairies fit with me. And move on. This is one of John Pumphrey's works from those student days. And you can see the Helgo influence, the star things and the lions with things. And that's me drinking a beer with my dog. And this is one of his later works. And you can still see there's Helgo imagery or influence. He's got, and this might be digital, but he's got all these patterns in that bird. Pretty neat painting. Now I want to discuss John Johnson. I should get to my notes so I don't forget too much. But anyway, John he was that sitting down photographer, but he went on to the Cranbrook Institute and got his advanced degree. And he's done these fantastic black and white photos. And he's published this book. We're going to have a book signing in the gallery first Friday in October. Please come to that. The other thing John's done is all these documentary films, one being Damon Runyon's Pueblo. And when they were filming that, another artist, Joe Paycheck, was the art director, but they were doing something on a building, and they took a photo, and it went nationwide in the AP. And that got a company in Atlanta interested in the Union Avenue thing, and that's actually how Union Avenue got redeveloped, was from that photo. Before I go back, I'm going to go back context-wise. Back in the early 70s, at the university or at the college, they would have this festival called Soup Art. And in the foyer of the new building they had out there, they'd set up booths and artists were invited, and they had entertainers and they had beer. Anyway, I got invited to that by some artists, and that's some people saw my work and asked me to be in their gallery. And 2 months later, they asked me if I knew anybody that would want to live there and run a gallery. So that's how I ended up in the gallery business, was from Soup Art. Wow. But also after that, Ed Scheibel, who was in charge of things, told those students, next year don't invite the riffraff. And I'm pretty sure he was referring to me at that time. Okay, everybody's familiar with Nathan Solano, I hope. He was in that group, but he knows how to paint the prairie, and horses, and cowboys, and Indians, and the city of Pueblo. A very talented painter. Okay, Nick Lacka, he died in 1992, but he was in that picture, and he went on to CU Boulder and got his MFA and came back to teach at the college. Anyway, this is one of Nick Lacka's ceramics, and it's in the Vance Kirkland Museum. And I do have a little chip on my shoulder about the Vance Kirkland Museum, and I'm really glad to see this is in that museum, because the first time I visited that museum, I asked the owner, I said, because he's collecting Colorado artists. And I said, well, you don't have any Southern Colorado artists. And he named 2 or 3 Colorado Springs artists. I said, yes, we do. And so that's kind of where Colorado ends to most people up north. So I'm really glad that they've got a Nick Lacka in their collection. This is Paul Gatos. He was one of the tall guys in that picture. And this is one of his recent works. And this is one of his post-student works. Now, he and Orlin Helgo and some of the other students, former students, would have all-night painting sessions. And this is one of Paul's large paintings. It's a portrait of Orlin Helgo. And you see he's looking at Pikes Peak, and the deer print is his shoulders and stuff. But Paul left Pueblo to go live in a teepee. And this is a 5 by 5 foot painting, so I inherited it because I had a wall in a house at the time. Okay, this is another student it was in that Prairie Art group. He wasn't in the photo. This is Joe Paycheck. This is one of his student works. You can see the Helgo influence there just with the deer print. This is Joe today. Joe got his advanced degree at the University of Arkansas, and he teaches at the College of Eastern Utah. I shared a studio with Joe for years before he left Pueblo, but he does these giant effigies. And this, before he left Pueblo, he started doing these petroglyph images that were in 3D. He had a concrete technique. This is at the Edge of the Cedars Museum in Utah. But he did a show here at the Art Center with these before he left town to teach. And then Joe became a real petroglyph expert. And this is one of his effigies of a mastodon. And there's Voice of America has a really nice video called Nature Man about Joe, and I really recommend you watch it. So one thing Joe did is he discovered a petroglyph in Utah that was of a mastodon. And that got disclaimed for quite a while, and now it's been validated. He's discovered the oldest petroglyph in the United States. And one thing he does, and you'll see this in this video, Nature Man, he builds these giant effigies, some 3 stories tall, out of wood particles, and at the solstice they burn them. And the other thing he does, where he is, he invites the tribal people to come to these solstice burnings. And he won a governor's award in Nevada because he installed a sculpture, I think it was Ely, Nevada, and he invited the people from the neighboring reservation to come to that dedication. And it was the first time that the locals got together with the natives. And he won a governor's award for that. So I really recommend watching that video. Okay, my wife said I need to throw some of my own work in here. This has definitely got, you can see Helgo's star thing, which if you wander the prairie, you'll see that image coming up in early spring in a plant of that star thing. And then this is one of mine with the Dorothy and John Mendoza influence. This is another artist from that time period. This is George Sanchez. He's another one whose father was a well-known artist. And maybe, I asked him if he was in that Prairie Art group, and he said, I had a wife, a kid, and a job. I didn't have time for that stuff. But he's made a career in his art. This one I can see some Helgo or some Mendoza influence in that watercolor of George's. And this is Leroy Razzo, who was a student at that time. Goes by Savas. And so Helgo and these they were influential to get people continuing. This is Joel Carpenter. You can see the Helgo influence in that. Joel was a student in 1973, and that's when Helgo was doing his most productive work at the time. And Joel got to watch him do a lot of it. Now I'm going to get into a little bit about Orland. This photo was done by John Johnson. And if you find his earlier work before 1972, you'll see it on paper, various sketches. This is a hybrid bird. It's an eagle with the metal arch chest done on that same paper. It's probably Prismacolor pencil. And it's a bird coming out of a fire, kind of like just in that Prairie Seance piece. Then in 1972, Joni Giratano, who's a local artist, started selling Trichem liquid embroidery and Pellon. That's the material. And that's when Orland started doing these amazing drawings with Trichem liquid embroidery. And you'll see a lot of them in the show over there. And that's called Young Man. And my theory, especially about Judith Pierce and Orland, is a lot of these are self-portraits. The Prairie Priest series, I've got seen young Prairie Priests, older Prairie Priests. There's probably some, from the time period, there's probably some Clint Eastwood influence. But I consider these self-portraits. I see, but then there's some work that's not a self-portrait. He also knew his cowboys. These are bar drawings from Gus's Tavern. This is a detail. You can also see the men at the campfire with the halos and the birds coming out. There's a lot of imagery in Helgo that's repeated. The 2 posts like that, and you'll see 2 posts with the barbed wire that he called brutal fence posts. Okay, I showed you that grave thing in that other painting. This is also sketched from Levita. This is 1977. There was a cemetery down somewhere in Huerfano County that had a lot of meaning to him. And one thing about Helgo, he was very generous. He gave away a lot of work. And this was given to a fellow professor, and since it was a cemetery, it stayed in their closet. So I learned from Helgo, don't give your work away. And I never did. If people pay a little bit, they won't put it in their closet. or end up in a secondhand store. And you do find some of his work in secondhand stores. Now this is also a sketch for a ballet. This is 1977. If you look at the booklet that was made for his retrospective in 86, it says that he stopped painting in 76, but he did have a period in 77, all these sketches from Huerfano County. He had had a relationship with a ballet dancer, and so you'll see the ballet dancers in the show over there. That's probably all from that period. This is really a straightforward piece, which doesn't have any of his usual imagery, which is kind of interesting. And here's the other thing about Helgo on the backs of some of these pieces. He gave away so much art. He kind of regretted that later. And he would go around and want it back. And if you bought it, they wouldn't give it back. So what he would do is he'd put his resume on the back of it. And so you will find pieces like that. This is the Prairie Seance piece with his resume on the back. And another thing about Helgo, he painted on all kinds of surfaces. This is the house. It's got his imagery there. They used to have a garage door that had amazing images. I don't know what happened to that. But there's also a door painted at the university that they had in his retrospective, but I don't know if they know where it is right now. I hope they do find it. I'm going to move on because this is Helgo's mentor from Cornell. His name's Alan Atwell. He was into Eastern mysticism. And so that kind of got Helgo interested. You'll see all these meditative pieces he did. But this is a room, it's kind of psychedelic, that his mentor did. And where I'm going with this is there's another artist in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, named Walter Anderson. He was born in 1903 and died in 65. But this is one of his rooms. And in Mississippi, he's known as the Van Gogh of the South. And I see a lot of similarity between his work and Helgo's. They both had the same, mental relapses. Helgo was institutionalized several times, and so was Walter Anderson. And with that, they'd have visions that most normal people don't get. And the thing about Walter Anderson, he would strip naked and go live on barrier islands and do painting after painting on typing paper. And I really see a lot of similarity between the Van Gogh of the South and Orland Helgo. This is another Walter Anderson. And so my point being is that Helgo is a real treasure here. He's the Van Gogh of the West, if not the Southwest. And it's really good that the Art Center celebrates his work and has a big collection of his work. And I urge them to keep showing his work. What they have is just from their collection right now. There's many people in town that have his work, and they can do show after show just to celebrate it, and it needs to be recognized. And there's Orland right there. I'm going to keep that slide in and talk about the visual arts. The Art Center opened in 1972. They had these major shows in this facility right here before they built the Helen White wing. And they've celebrated showing a lot of artists. Now, there's been ups and downs with different directors that have come in. Now, in the 1980s, Al Kochka was the director, and he was very encouraging to artists around here. And then his wife, Trish Kochka, she opened a gallery on Union. And one thing Al Kochka did was he looked at the artists when they were saying, we need to be shown here at the Art Center more. He looked at us and said, you need to open your own gallery. And that's when Scheibel and Wands started the Off-Broadway Gallery, which has evolved into the gallery that I'm with now, the John Doe Gallery. But the other thing Trish Kochka did when she opened that gallery in the 80s was she went to the newspaper. The newspaper wouldn't print much about artists at the time because they weren't advertisers. And she got the paper to turn that around, and they hired a writer, Carol Kronwaiter, who's here today, who was a real booster for the arts in those days. And then they hired a critic, Lyman Pittman, who was a real critic. But they did get things going in the 80s. Now, the other thing that happened in the 80s was, the mill went down significantly, and we came into a depression in this town. And I did read an art historian once said that art thrives in a depression or a place at war. And art has thrived in Pueblo. And so if you get that list, you'll see all the artists that have been here. And please add to it. Another thing, when you go into the 90s, there was a curator that came to work here, and she brought some of her fellow artists, and they came from northern Colorado. They were going to bring art to Pueblo. And they thought Pueblo could be another Taos. And I've heard that over and over again, that Pueblo could be another Taos. But Taos is Taos, and Pueblo is Pueblo. Historically, we've had a trade route since the 1840s with Taos. And a lot of these artists I'm showing you showed at Galleria in Taos. And some of my artists still show in Taos. It's not what it used to be, but it's still a major art market. But anyway, Pueblo's Pueblo, and I think artistically it's pretty important. Pueblo's known as the home of the heroes, but the artists I showed you in the beginning, those are all heroes to me. Anyway, I'm going to take you to the present. I've got a list of artists for you to look at, but we've got the Arts Alliance that's got a thriving art walk going. And we've got these galleries now, the Blowback Galleries, Steel City Galleries, a thriving co-op. The Ethos is a neat thing. There's, in my list, I'm not mentioning the children of the artists that are involved right now. That things are growing in Pueblo artistically, and this other group, this consortium, they just finished their meeting, and Andy, the director here Andy Sanchez, is part of this, and it's a vision to get the arts known outside of town, which is a real turnaround. There was a director here at one time that said it wasn't her job to promote the arts locally. And I'm real grateful that right now it's being promoted. I do want to bring John Johnson up here to talk a little bit. This was that young guy with the headband.
No headband, no hair.
So anyway, take it over first.
I think this is great that Rado did this, because there's so many artists from this area that have been so significant, not just for Pueblo, but for Colorado and for the Southwest. And we both date from that time period, the late 60s, early 70s. And the department at that time was just dynamite. Ed Scheibel is here. He's the first guy that ever gave me an art scholarship. Juan's taught drawing. Matter of fact, it was Juan's classes doing drawings on Union that basically at that time, Union was a place that most normal people would not go. It was a bad place, drunks laying there and so forth. We got a grant a long time ago. The Art Center did. Sangre, Cristo and I have a lot of history together. 47 years ago, can you believe it? 47 years ago, the Art Center asked me if I wanted a one-man show of my photography here. And I said yes. And then a few years after that, in 1979, the Art Center asked me to direct the National Endowment for the Humanities funded Damon Runyon's Pueblo. And I said yes. And about 2 months ago, this guy said, "You want to film this?" And I said, no. No, I said yes, unfortunately. Hopefully I can drop the artwork in there, because the light difference is so different that these are burning out. We have a lot of nice pictures of him, but these are all going to be white, so maybe I can drop the artwork in there. But over the decades of all my films, basically there have been large casting calls here. 600-800 people were not unusual for each time I did a film. There were film premieres. Matter of fact, on the Pike, I did 3 films. Damon Runyon's Pueblo, Zebulon Pike and the Blue Mountain, and Blue Lights. And on the Pike premiere, we actually had a, what do you call it? Light going through the sky. So this was a very dynamic period. And that's why I'm so glad that he's done this. I did a book, I finished a book on my own work. I did a previous book on my father that many of you might know, Buddy Johnson. He was on TV, radio, had a Western band for 40 years. But it's so good that Rado has done this, because a lot of these artists They produced significant work over the years. Great guys. We had a lot of fun. The group picture that you saw, we shot out at Swallows. And I think Ed told Orland, there's extra money. It's the end of the year. Maybe we can do something. And Orland asked me, can you shoot some stuff and maybe we can do something with that? So we went out to Swallows and I shot stuff with the whole group around some houses. Swallows, which is an old town that is underwater now. And I shot long lines of us. And the neatest one was the one that you see, which is the front and the back. And what we ended up doing was printing a big poster that's like 3 feet by 4 feet on sort of a yellow paper. I think it was cheap. But then the department encouraged us to send them to people that we admired. I sent mine to Ansel Adams. But it was a freehand hanging piece that you could hang and you could actually walk around. You could see the front and the back of. Because Sangre de Cristo is mentioned in my book on about every page, I thought this is the best place for them to have a copy of this book because it really does tell a lot of the history of this area. This is the place that more than any other institution really furthered my art career, and I think his. And Andy, if you want to come up, I'll give you this book.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, you bet. Yeah, I've had 4 shows at this art center, and I'm going to be doing a retrospective in a year and a half here in the big gallery, so I'll have my own program about my work then. But I do want to say some of these heroes are here. Ed Scheibel is here. John and Dorothy Mendoza are here tonight, and I'm really glad they made it to this. So, and thank you all for coming.